Hi everyone, got a nice autumn scene that I took a photo of when I was away last week. This is Studley Royal Deer Park. It was a really nice clear autumn day, so we've got some nice autumn trees to get in here, a little bit of water. It'd be a lovely one for us to have a go at. Colours wise, I've got a huge selection ready. I've got grey with cobalt blue and burnt sienna, cobalt blue with a tiny bit of water, cobalt blue and sap green to make a darker green, and then these are all neat colours. So I've got gamboge, sap green, raw sienna, burnt sienna. Oh, this one has got, this is burnt sienna and alizarin crimson with a little mix to make a redder colour, and sepia. They're all your colours ready. Okay, so I've drawn out the scene. Concentrate on trying to simplify these sections. So I've got a section here at the back. I've got the bridge mid-ground section and a foreground section. Otherwise you'll get lost very easily. A rough shape of the trees. Make sure when you're doing this pathway at the front that you consider that it's foreshortening and you need to go wider at the front. So wider at the front. That will give it the sense of distance that you need. I've popped a tiny bit of masking fluid on. So a little bit along this edge here, where it's nice and dark, I've gone in and made some little grass shapes. You'll see it as I go through the video and you see it appear. Then I've put some leaves within this. So I've done it with a combination of a sponge, dabbing a little bit of masking fluid on, and my colour shaper to dab some on. And then I've popped a tiny bit on this one here as well. So those two bigger trees, I've got some lighter leaves to come on there because they're going to be a bit denser. And then this grassy section, you can go all the way down to here with the grassy section if you want. It just come all the way down past the bridge. I've just done this little bit here. I'm going to show you a little bit something different down here as well. Okay, so make sure that's nice and dry. You've got your colours all mixed up, and we're going to come on with our first layer. So it's hard to explain exactly where I'm going, but I'm going to the mid-ground, which means you're including all of those trees. All of those trees, pretty much down to the bridge on this bottom side here. As I put the colour on, you'll see where I've gone. If we don't try to simplify it into 3 sections, we'll be here for a long time doing it. You can do it in more sections if you want. You've got the luxury at home. With another lockdown, we've got plenty of time. Right, I'm just making sure I've got plenty of water on. Brush is nice and clean. So I've got my round number 10. I'm going to come in with a little bit of the cobalt blue to start with. Now I want you to make sure you're coming over a little bit of these trees. It's very easy to think, oh, there's trees there, so therefore there won't be any colour of the sky behind there, but there is, and it helps when you're doing your layering later to have that little bit of colour there. Doesn't matter if you come over the grass with a little bit of the blue. It's quite pale, this blue, anyway, so it just works. And then make sure you give your grey a little bit of a mix up. Now you don't want tons of grey. You want to have a bit of a cloudy effect, but not too much. We don't want storm. So I'm bringing a little bit with circular motion, so I get that lighter area appearing there. can, if you want to, with a bit of kitchen towel, lift out the clouds to make them sharper. I quite like it when it's a little bit more hazy and soft. Right, if you put plenty of water on now, you're going to be fine. It's a case of just building up the layers and looking at the colours. So we'll start with a little bit of raw sienna. It's the most forgiving. I've dried my brush off and I'm dabbing into the raw sienna now. And I'm just going to start to pop it in. If you start at the bottom, then if it goes too far, you can stop and wait a bit. I think you'll find, because it's neat colour and your brush is dry, it actually works quite well. So you're going to start to get these nice shapes in. Don't worry about branches or trunks at this stage. We'll worry about them at the next stage. You're just getting some shapes of trees in. Even if we just get shapes of trees, that's a good base to start with. We can do some sponging later. I've already lost my pencil lines. So I'm looking for the lighter trees, but you can put some of the darker ones in as well. You're just starting to get those shapes in, really. If you're worried, you can drop down to a number 6. Okay, so this is sap green. Again, dry brush. I've rinsed it off, I've dried it off before I've taken the colour in. If you think about where the grass is as well, and that distant bit, that's quite helpful. Gives you a basis to know where you're going with the rest of your trees. We've also got this grassy bit here. And you're just going to go through all these colours. So I'm going to dab a little bit into some burnt sienna now. Start to bring some of that in. It's like an orange tree in the distance here, so I can start to get that bit in there. You can take a little bit of burnt sienna into these ones where you've got the raw sienna. You can take some burnt sienna into the sap green ones. Remember, you're going for an impression of it. It doesn't have to be exact. You can very easily and quickly get bogged down. You don't want that to happen. But you see the burnt sienna mixing with the sap green, you'll get that darker muted colour in places. It's a classic complementary colour combination. You can take a little bit in for shadow. Mute it down. Let's get a little bit of my red colour. So this is the alizarin, crimson and burnt sienna mixed together. Just remember, this is your base, it doesn't have to be everything. A bit of a rinse off. Right, so I've got the darker green now. So I've just dabbed off a little bit. So I don't want that to go mad, it's because that's a bit more of a mix of green. Just get some of this darker in. Got a couple of darker trees in the distance. And then lastly, I want you to pick up some sepia and just look for where the dark areas are and just pop a little bit in. It doesn't have to be everywhere. If you concentrate on getting the bases of the trees, it's quite useful because that's grounding them a little bit. So where you can see some shadow, get that in. So mine's still really wet, so I've got plenty of time to play and fiddle if I want to. Let's just take a little bit more green into one of these trees to make it a little bit different. And just break that line up there. A little bit more of a tree here as well. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's all dry now. I'm going to do a couple of sections now. I'm going to do this water. Didn't need to do that. This water here. And a bit at the back above the bridge. So I'm wetting both of those sections. So I'm going to take a little bit of raw sienna. In that section. And some blue into this water. Now there is a bit of a wooden bridge over. I'm going to ignore the wooden bridge. I always try to simplify it a little bit. So you can see I'm trying to do, where possible, horizontal strokes. It tapers out here. Then I'm going to swap down to round number 6. I've made sure my brush is nice and dry. Picked up some of this sap green. I'm just bringing that in just to create that soft effect there. Rinse my brush off. I want some of the grey. Again, I picked up a little bit of the grey. And if you concentrate on getting a few horizontal strokes in, it will work really quite nicely. I have dabbed the brush off a little bit so it's not going too mad. It's definitely darker down that side there. A bit there, it's because it's reflecting the bank. Okay, so I'm going to dry those two off. Okay, so I've dried those off. I'm going to pick out now this middle section just in two stages. So I'm going to do this back bit here. Pop some water on. Again, there's quite a lot of raw sienna, so bring that across. I'm using my round number 10, but you could use your round number 6 if you wanted. So I'm sort of stroking and dabbing at the same time. You don't want too much sap green on here. What you've got is these little tracks. I'm going to drop down to my round number 6 in the grey. Make sure I give it a good stir again. And dab a little bit off so it doesn't go mad. And use that to get the shadow the side of those tracks. Some little bits of shadow here and there as well. And just with a dry damp brush, I'm just coming over this just to soften that in a little bit. I don't want it to be too harsh. I can put a couple of sharp shadows in later. I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so I've dried that one off now. I'm going to concentrate on this final middle ground section. I've got a little bit of clean film ready for the bridge. So I'm going to bring some water along. I'm just using my round number 10 because I don't want to overload it with water. These are smaller sections because we're doing lots of little sections. So we're not putting any water on the bridge yet. Before I forget. You can do the underside of the bridge, that's not a problem. Coming along there. So it's a nice little section again, really. Okay, so we're coming forward now, so I'm not going to put the raw sienna on. So I want to get a sense of freshness as we come forward. So we're going to go straight in with the sap green. I'm going to drop down to a number 6 for my shadow colour. Right, get the path in, and that will stop the sap green running. So this is the grey. I'm going to take some grey along here as well. You can use it on the underside of the bridge. That's fine. And then you're going to come into some sepia. Don't worry about getting the definition, just get the darkness at the minute. Then bring it along this bank. Along this edge. And then, well, similar this side. I'm just going to touch in with a sepia because it's on my brush. Along there. And then a little bit of the grey. Just to blend through. And then if you load your brush with clean water and just touch a couple of places, you're going to start to get a watermark. That watermark can become grass. Little grassy bits. So just along this edge, you're just going to have a few little grassy bits. It'll push away and give you a soft effect. Okay, I'm going to dry that bit off. Okay, so I've dried that one off and I'm going to pop some water on this bit of the bridge now. I'm going to get some nice texture happening on there with clean film. So I'm going to take a tiny bit of raw sienna on. And give my grey a bit of a stir. Go in with plenty of that, otherwise you won't get much texture at all. You can leave it lighter towards the edges. And then I'm going to pop the clean film on and I want you to scrunch inwards. Plenty of scrunching, and then we can leave that to dry. Okay, whilst that's drying, I'm going to come in with my sponge. So I'm starting with this redder colour, so as I start to get a bit more of a base for these trees at either side. So I've wet my sponge. I've wrung it out really well. I've then dried it off on a little bit of kitchen towel, and then I've collected the paint on quite a shallow dish, and then you can come on and it's just getting the bobbly bits of the sponge. It should work quite nicely, and I'm dabbing and then I'm twisting. And dabbing again, twisting mid-air, so you get that way you get a varied texture. You might need to dry it in between. You can't always get it all in one go. If it starts to look a little bit too wet, then definitely dry it off. You'll always need more paint than you think, so mix up plenty. And make sure you come around the bits where your masking fluid is, so that you're going to get those lighter leaves happening later. You don't want floaty leaves. Just have some base there. I might have a pick up a little bit of the burnt sienna on its own. I can just come in and do a bit behind on this tree behind. I wouldn't touch these trees in the very distance. Keep to your bigger trees that are closer to you. It's very easy to make your picture look flat because you're getting too much detail in there. I'm just picking up a little bit on these ones. And then that's where I'd stop. Take a tiny bit on that tree behind here. Take some burnt sienna in here. I'm picking up a little bit of sepia now, so that I can come in, just create these darker areas. So I'm dabbing the dark patches now rather than the lighter leaves. Just to break that up. Darker down there. A little bit of dark down here as well. You can go in with your, don't be afraid to go in with your brush as well to get these darker patches. So I'm going to bring, this is my round number 6. And I'm just using a little bit of sepia. I can see a hint of a tree trunk down there. It's not, I'm not really defining anything, I'm just adding little bits of shadow. Apart from that one tree trunk there, which I can see. It's all really just shadow that I can see. And then just look over this side. A little bit more in there, then that's going to bring out that tree. Just going to bring a little bit of water on that bit. Don't want it to be too hard, just to soften in. Then there's a little bit down here. So a bit of shadow here. And then a little bit of water just to soften in. So I'm just taking a little bit of shadow in these trees here. Nice either fine line writer or rigger. And you can pop in these tiny little branches, you can see. Again, less is more. You just want to make sure they don't look like they're floating. And you want little bits of branches because you can't see a whole branch and a whole trunk. So don't go and do a whole thing. Okay, I'm going to dry that bit off. Okay, I've dried that bit off. I've popped a couple of little branches in here as well. I'm just waiting for this cling film to dry off naturally. So I can bring in a little bit more of a shadow. On these bits. So that's sepia with around number 6, and then I can just again soften in that bottom edge. So this is a damp brush, just softening in the bottom edge. I've loaded my brush with water, picked up a little bit of sepia. I can just run that through, varying the pressure, following the line of the hill. You just get that little bit of an effect of shadow, and every little bit of definition is helping, but you don't want to create a huge amount. Okay, so this is a little bit of sap green. I'm just going to bring it along this top edge here. Just bolding that up a little bit. Just add a bit of water if you think it looks a bit too thick. These are all little sections, so you can get away with just popping a little bit on and defining it a little bit more. And dab into a bit of sepia. Define the edge a little bit more. None of this has to be very strong, and you can soften in at bottom edges. It's just giving it that little bit more oomph. Okay, I'm just going to dry that off and take the cling film off, peel it carefully. So I've peeled the cling film off, I've got lovely texture there. I've wet this bottom section now, and I really want to get this nice and bright and fresh. So this is where the gamboge comes in. So the first colour that I'm taking in, rather than the raw sienna, is the gamboge, and I'm going to keep that in these grassy areas. And that's going to give a real freshness and bring it forward a little bit. Then into the sap green. Don't eliminate all of the gamboge, follow the line of the land. Just get this base on nice and quickly. We're going to work into this once we've got it in. It's nice to get all the picture covered where you want it covered. pop into the grey, get this pathway in. And then this bit of grey down here as well. And a tiny bit of raw sienna just up towards this top section. It's coming through. I'm just going to pick up my line writer. Or rigger, twizzle round. And just pop in a few grasses. You can twizzle your picture around as well. But basically, before this line dries too much, it's your opportunity to add in a few grasses over the water. If you do find the lines dried already, don't worry, just keep agitating over it and make the line a little bit higher and it will still work. Where we softened in earlier, you can bring some grasses over that as well. So this section. You can even bring a few through here if you want. I'm going to take this masking fluid off in a minute anyway. Just easier to paint them when you're doing it upside down. Just pick up a little bit of burnt sienna. Just going to push in. Just to break this line up here a little bit. I've simplified this foreground quite a lot, but you can just take some colour in. What you should have is a real nice freshness to it, so don't go mad with the burnt sienna and then regret it, because you'll lose the freshness if it moves too much with the green. If you want to try and get this sort of cobbled effect, it can always be a bit hazardous when I tell you to do bricks or cobbles, because it tend to look quite regimented. Then come in with your line writer whilst it's damp. It'll stop you doing too much. Follow the curve and just pop in a few lines. And then what you've got to think is the same as this path, is it's foreshortening the angle of the camera, so you need to come out, and my advice is just do a few. A few will work, so I'm tapering in, some bigger, some smaller. Just create a few sort of random wiggly lines and it will work. You can always define a couple after when it's dry. Round number 6, a bit of sepia, just look for your darks. So that's the last bit you want to do really. If you want a couple of bits of dark in. If you've simplified like me, there probably won't be a lot of dark to put in. You can have a bit along the edge of the path. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so I've rubbed the masking fluid off, dried everything off, rubbed the masking fluid off, and I'm just filling in. So you don't have to watch me too much. I've taken a very light mix of the red colour, taken some of that on. Then I'm coming across with some gamboge in places as well, so you get a nice hint of light. So it takes a little bit of time to fill these in, but the overall effect is you've got the light of the leaves coming through. I've done this side as well, and it works really nicely. I'm getting those hints of golden colour. You can take more sponging on as well at this stage. Then I'm going to come over these grassy bits with a tiny bit of raw sienna. So you don't have to be too precise. Then we're going to break in that with a little bit of green. So this is my round number 6. I'm just taking some green on up to, and then I can just wet underneath. Take a few little bits of sepia on. So what I'm doing is following the line of the land. Just building this up a little bit so that I've got more of a slope this side. So this is just sap green, and I'm taking it on randomly and then softening in with a little bit of water. It doesn't matter if I don't hit everywhere. What I'm just trying to do at this point is build in a little bit of texture and the definition that you're following the line of the land, and in particular on this side because it is sloping. So you've got a license to be a little bit looser with it. And then if I come down this side, just capture the path here, a little bit more defined on the path, and then I'm going to do the same this side but with the grey on the path here. So I'm going to create this edge and then work back from that edge. Horizontal strokes means it's a flat surface. So the trick is to wet the path but not wet up to the green edge that you've done, so you get that flow and that little bit more definition. Now because I've done that edge darker, I don't want to put too much on here. So again I'm going to come in with a little bit of sap green, just because this is more flat. I'm just going to create a flat effect. So what you're looking for is a bit of undulation, I suppose is a technical term. You don't want it to be too flat. And take a little bit in here. So if at this point you've got a great desire to put in a few cobbles, then you can either do it with the grey or you can do it with the green. By the green I mean you would paint round, with the grey you'd paint on. My advice is do a few randomly, not too many in clusters, and then leave well alone. It's very easy to get bogged down in the detail. You want the focal point to be the bridge really. So I've popped a few cobbles in. Okay, I'm going to dry that off and then we'll come to the bridge. Okay, so I've mixed a little bit of sepia and cobalt blue together, so I've got this darker effect, and I'm started to come on with a few lines. Now the one underneath needs to be quite sharp. Then I've popped 2 lines on here, quite varied with the pressure of the brush, to make sure that they're not too... Okay, so I've softened in those top areas in this middle area, and they can come through with a little bit of this darker grey. So I'm just dabbing through, create that textured effect, but you need to make sure that you're leaving those other sections lighter, so the top and the bottom needs to be a little bit lighter. You can start to pull some shadow up. If you look really carefully at the bridge, you'll see the stones sort of curve round, and you can create that curve. You just don't want to lose the light. I've got this dark bit underneath that I've just painted on dry. Less is more. And dry that off and put a couple of dark lines on. So concentrate on the top and the bottom, don't do too many lines in this middle bit. Okay, so I've just done a few more twiddly bits on here. The SD card ran out. In no way can you see bricks, so I don't want you to go and put a line of bricks in. It's random dark lines, just to break that up and make it feel like a bridge. Make sure you get that dark bit underneath, and it will work really nicely. Okay, so that's today's picture, and I'll see you next week. Bye.